Welcome to the latest edition of the Hub of Champions podcast with your host, Shukri Wrights. It only has been a week since the parade in Boston for banner number 18 for the Boston Celtics. Yeah, newsflash, the Celtics did win the NBA Finals after the last recording of this pod, which took place during the finals. But I'm excited to be joined for this episode by Noa Dalzell, who does a tremendous job covering the Boston Celtics. You can check out her work across social media, including on Twitter as well. Noah, how are you doing a week after at the parade? It just feels like that we're still like kind of in that fog of celebration and so forth. But how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I can't believe there was an NBA draft this week. That came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I feel like there should have been like a couple more weeks until that happened. But yeah, it's been a great time to be in Boston. I feel like you can maybe not as much right now, but the first like week or two after the championship, it just is just an exciting feeling in the air. So yeah, it's been a very fun first season covering the Celtics, and especially fun last couple of weeks.
Absolutely. In fact, how has your first season been overall? Like, walk us through that, like, just the journey of that first season covering the Celtics, which happens to be a championship season, the first championship on for the Celtics in 16 years.
Yeah, there's literally nothing I would change about this past season. Honestly, it was such a great debut for covering the NBA, and in particular, like you know, the Celtics team. I've been following this team for a long time, but this is my first year actually being on the
Yeah.
ground, covering pressers and everything. And you could just tell from the beginning that this team was different and that it was a very special group, and that I thought from the beginning they had a really good chance of winning the championship. And so, seeing all the hard work and all the kind of details and the more boring parts of the year pay off and into a very dominant playoff run, it was very rewarding. And then, just from a personal standpoint, like I grew up loving TD Garden more than any place on earth. And so being able to spend so much time there covering the team and just being immersed in the environment. And then not only that, but exactly the first time they win in my time
Yeah.
following the team. So it was really great.
And it's wonderful because, like, having watched the team for a while myself, and as well as like just I was reflecting on the journey the night the Celtics won the NBA title about a week and a half ago now, and I was thinking back to those formidable days back in 2013, especially when the Celtics made the decision to break up the big three, obviously like trading away like Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, both of whom got traded to the Brooklyn Nets. Obviously, Ray Allen moved on to the Miami Heat after the 2012 Eastern Conference Finals loss to the Miami Heat, who went on to win the title. From those formidable days up until when the Celtics in back-to-back years had a top 5 draft pick, obviously in 2016 drafting Jaylen Brown, and in 2017 drafting Jayson Tatum as well. When you think about the journey that has led up to this moment, and the moment is still very much fresh. Before we get into the finals that just happened, but when you think about those formidable days and just the journey in terms of thinking that we were close and then the disappointments, how much more has this just journey of this 2023-2024 championship season for the Celtics, how much sweeter has it been for you?
How much what?
How much sweeter has it
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this applies to more than just basketball, but failure and the difficult time only makes the being on top more rewarding. And I think from just from following this team, I'm sure this applies to them as well. I think this meant a lot more to them than had they won in 2022. I mean,
Mhm.
Jayson and Jaylen, I'm sure some of maybe Al Horford had already been through enough struggles by then to really understand how significant it was. But the last two seasons, I think, are the ones that people are going to point to where they felt the Celtics team was really well positioned to win the championship, obviously being in the finals with a 2-1 lead, and then having an opportunity to just win at home and advance to the finals last season versus Miami. And both times they watched another team raise a trophy on their own floor, right? And so to
Yeah.
me, not only to be able to win, but to do it at TD Garden, I thought that was super fitting. And Joe Mazzulla talked about it as part of the All In series that the Celtics media team has been rolling out. He said, I knew we were going to win because we had made a commitment and we had kind of decided that we were going to do everything we needed to win. And I knew we were going to do it at home. And so it was just a question of, are we going to do it in 5 games or in 7? And obviously, it's easy to say in hindsight, but I do think that it was very fitting that they were able to get this done at TD Garden, at the same place that for the last 2 seasons now, they've had to watch another team celebrate, whether it was the Warriors in 2022 winning the championship or the Heat
Yeah.
winning the conference in 2023, right? So
Yeah.
very full circle. I felt like, especially for Jaylen Brown, this was a postseason of complete redemption, and just where he was a year ago going into the offseason and where he is right now, literally
Yeah.
on top of the world. It only made his success more sweet as well, I think, both for him and for everybody around him.
Absolutely. And I think that when you go back to Game 7 of against the conference final in the conference final against the Miami Heat last year, I remember um, when they got blown out at home and thinking, and I remember making a video and then as well as doing a different appearance elsewhere at the time, saying that it is time to make major changes. Like it wasn't a knee jerk reaction, but I remember a lot of Celtic fans that were actually against making those changes, especially like the notion of possibly moving on from Marcus Smart, which in fact did happen. And like when moving on from Marcus Smart, because obviously like he wasn't the only one that moved on from Malcolm Brogdon as well, but most particularly Marcus Smart, because Marcus Smart, as you know, has such an incredible relationship with Celtics fans at the city of Boston and what he means to the Celtic organization. But also, I remember saying distinctly when the Celtics decided that they were going to acquire Drew Holiday just before training camp started. And I said then that this was going to be the biggest upgrade on this roster as pertains to replacing Marcus Smart. You got a better defender and a player who has won a championship before, something that the Celtics did not have on the roster prior to this season. So Noah, going back to last September, early October, when the acquisition of Drew Holiday first happened, and obviously, Kristaps Porzingis also came as well. But I want to focus specifically on Drew Holiday. In your mind, in your eyes, how significant of a change was this for you to move on from Marcus Smart and to bring in Drew Holiday, whom, as we all know, obviously now was a significant and an important change to this roster and as well as the locker room chemistry as well?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating story because, I think we talk a lot about Smart and Drew, and
Mhm.
in reality, the trade was for Porzingis, who really wasn't a big contributor in the playoffs because of his injuries. And so I'm always fascinated, like what would have happened had Drew not been available, right? And then you're thinking about a completely different trade-off. But
Mhm.
I think Drew Holiday made all the difference, honestly. Like I don't know that they win this championship without him, and I don't know that I don't know that they have the opportunity to be in the position to have not only the regular season record that they had, but there was games down the stretch that they were just, he was just monumental in. And in
Yeah.
the offense, the defense is, I think just from watching them both, Drew
Mhm.
Holiday is a better all around defender. I think Marcus Smart has more game winning plays and kind of you could put his defensive highlight reel together and it's great. And I'm a huge Marcus Smart fan.
Yeah.
But Drew is just a little bit more versatile. But offensively is really where the upgrade was. And at points, it was looking during the regular season that maybe he wouldn't be, right? There was a question around like, his efficiency was down. He wasn't taking a lot of shots. At the beginning of the playoffs, he was actually a little bit of a drop off from Marcus
Yeah.
Smart's playoff numbers. And then he just totally turned it around and had so many big games in this postseason run, became one of the league's best 3-point shooters from the corners. And so just that alone, I mean, Marcus Smart was never a good 3-point shooter. That was always a deficiency of his. And even he fired them up, but he was never, for his entire career, he was not efficient from the field or from three. And Drew Holiday became incredibly efficient. And so, yeah, I think in a lot of ways, the skill set that he offered better complemented Jaylen and Jayson. And I think he was really happy to defer to them. He talked about them like he was on a completely different level than they were, and they were the stars, and he was just here to help. And even though he was literally an all-star the year prior. So the fit could not have been better.
Yeah.
I'm really glad they extended him. And I think if you had to attribute like what was the big change this postseason, there's a lot of things that I think they did better this time around that enabled them to win. But Drew Holiday might be number one for me.
I agree, and I had a conversation with some other members of the Celtics media as well about how I personally thought that Drew Holiday was probably the biggest difference maker for this team in terms of both offensively and as well as especially his defensive plays. We saw that in throughout the season, but most notably in the conference finals against the Pacers and as well as the NBA Finals as well against the Mavericks. And when I look at Drew Holiday and the DNA that he brings forth, and this is part of a much lengthier conversation on this particular matter, I have said this consistently throughout the entire season that DNA makeup on a team matters. And when you have a guy that has won, he won with the Milwaukee Bucks, and if people remember just how vital he was during his first championship run with the Milwaukee Bucks 3 years ago with Giannis Antetokounmpo, Bobby Portis Jr. and company, you realize that this wasn't just someone who was just an all NBA defender, but this was someone that could also score. That's all that can also contribute offensively, and you saw that in spurts during these playoffs. So when you mentioned how Marcus Smart was a guy who loved to chuck up threes, like he was just like shooting lights out in the gym, but oftentimes it was maddening to watch him shoot, and I'm like, what are you doing? But now what you saw from Drew Holiday from during the regular season into the postseason was someone who knew when to pick his spots, and him working alongside Derek White was made without question like the most dynamic and almost the best defensive backcourt in the league. So Noah, when you look at the chemistry between Derek White and Drew Holiday defensively at what they were able to do, and as well as offensively, how critical was it that those two were able to mesh as well as they did early in the season, and for it to continue to build as the season progressed and went on?
Yeah, I think it was huge. I mean, it's across the team. There was just complete buy-in to one another to work together to achieve, to achieve a championship. Really, like that was it
Oh
was an
yeah.
obsession. It was the only thing that mattered. Derek White and Drew Holiday are a perfect example of that. In the playoffs, one of the finals pressers that we had, one of the reporters asked Derek White about what it was like to play with Drew Holiday, and Drew Holiday said, and Derek said, he could have come in and said, "I'm Drew Holiday, like you defer to me," and I would have been like, "You're right, you're Drew Holiday." And instead, I think that he felt like Drew Holiday empowered him to actually be the lead guy, the starting point guard, and he took more shots than him during the regular season. He averaged more points. He got more attention. He was the one that was a near all star, not Drew, right? And so I think that it was that type of sacrifice for Drew to come in and basically say, "Hey, you were slated to be the starting point guard. You can still be the starting point guard, and I'll do everything I can to make your life easier as the off ball guard." As at points he was the point guard, but a lot of times he wasn't. And I think it was a perfect representation of what kind of sacrifice took place on this roster in order to achieve the ultimate goal, which was winning the championship. And then obviously, I actually think in the playoffs, if you had to pick one, maybe Drew was actually more impactful than Derek White, although it's really hard to say because they were both critical to what this team was able to accomplish. But that was a departure from the regular season where I thought Derek was one of the most important players on the court at all times. And a lot of that was because Drew was willing to let him be that, and was his number one supporter and taught him a lot about defense. And they talked a lot about what that was, that chemistry and camaraderie was like. So that partnership was huge.
Speaking of Derek White, because I remember seeing something that a good friend of mine, my mentor Bob Sosi, the radio voice of the Patriots, said on Twitter that the trade for Derek White 2 years ago has gotten better with each and every game that he's been a Celtic, and I couldn't agree more. And as someone who covered the team from day one through the night they won banner number 18, how big has the growth of Derek White been this past season as it pertains to not just the production, but it's his growth since he arrived, but especially this season where we just alluded to him having the freedom and feeling that he could take the reins to be the lead point guard as part of the best defensive backcourt in the league. Like, what did you see in terms of his growth and how key it certainly was, especially once playoff basketball arrived and he was able to take his game to another level?
Yeah, it was critical. So Derek White, he had shots throughout this regular season and throughout the playoffs where he looked like Steph Curry, whether or not he made it, but just the types of attempts that he would take that if you zoom out, you're like, who is this guy taking this step back three with a hand in his face that he just dribbled for 10 seconds, like just wild shots. And he actually made them at a good clip, right? He ended up being a really reliable three-point shooter. And I forget the record, but he broke a couple of records where he's now, as far as three-pointers made on a certain efficiency in the playoffs, where he's now in the company of only Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. So
Yeah.
his shooting during this playoff run was critical to what the team was able to achieve throughout the whole season. And a lot of that is just confidence. He obviously struggled when he was first traded to Boston, in mid-season 2022. And I also think a lot of it is just hard work and working with the coaching staff. I see him shoot threes after every practice. He's usually the last person in the gym. He's all, he has one of the smoothest looking shots just from a shooting around standpoint. It's like he literally never misses. It looks like he just makes like 20 in a row every time I watch him shoot. But I think he was empowered by Joe Mazzulla to be the lead guy, and, in that backcourt, and to also shoot like as much as he wanted. Like I think he pretty much had a green light. And I asked him after they won the championship, like, well, what does Joe mean to you? And he literally started crying and said, he means everything to me. Like I would do anything for him. He believed in me when my career was in a really like tough spot, and to come off of 2022. And Joe obviously takes over, and he gives him full faith that he's going to be the starting point guard, that he's going to have the green light, that a lot of these shots that seem like maybe crazy shots are actually good shots for him because he's a really good shooter, right? That was one of the biggest. We talked about Drew Holiday, that addition. Derek White's growth and kind of leap this season might be up there, if not number one, number two, as things that really enable this team to take the next step.
I couldn't agree more because, like, night in and night out, whether I was watching the games or listening to the games, I felt as if that watching him just elevate his game to the level of which that Drew Holiday brought his game to this team certainly made that backcourt all the more formidable. And they were nice where I was just like, wow. Like, I didn't think we would have this type of player when he arrived from San Antonio in 2022, but I'm like, this guy's good. And it's just a matter of when and how much are the Celtics willing to extend Derek White. It's a question of when, like how much term are they willing to give him, and how much money is Brad Stevens willing to point there and say, hey, you know what? This is the money that we're willing to give you. Derek White made it clear he wants to stay in Boston. Noah, so like, how much do you think it will take for the Celtics to and Derek White to be able to agree on term and as well as money for his next contract? Because it seems like everybody else is locked up for the next at least minimum 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, well, I do know that it's probably it's the team's number one priority going into the offseason, right? You already have Drew Holiday extended. You're going to give Tatum the supermax. That's not a question. And then outside of that, yeah, you have Porzingis, you have Jaylen Brown, you have, who am I missing? You have everybody, right?
Yeah, Al Horford as well. Horford's
and Al Horford for one more season, and who knows what's gonna, if he'll stick around after that. I honestly wouldn't be shocked if he stuck around on a veteran minimum or something like that. But this is going to be their priority. Brad Stevens spoke with us yesterday after the draft, and he said, we want to keep this group around, and we want to extend the guys that we're able to extend. And he's also mentioned Hauser and how he really wants to keep Hauser here long term, if he's able to. And so really the question is going to be, can they offer him something that is competitive with what he might be able to get as a free agent? And to be honest with you, I'm not the expert on the cap and exactly what the numbers are that he might be able to see on the open market. But I will say that seeing what guys like Emmanuel Quickly and other players that he's definitely better than are signing for, a little bit concerning, I think, because I don't know that Boston can offer him that kind of deal, just considering their cap constraints and the fact that they are going to have one of the most expensive 6-person rotation in the league. Probably the most, if not one of the most. And so I think they'll pay what they're able to, what they, I think they'll pay as much as they're able to. I don't think ownership has given Brad Stevens the green light to spend as much as he wants. So it's going to be more league constraints that he's facing. And he said it yesterday, like, we don't really have many tools at our disposal. Like, it'll just be extending those two guys. And other than that, we only have minimums. They can't offer like the mid-level exception as a second apron team, right? So it's more of a question of, is he going to accept the pay cut? Because there's going to be other teams that can pay more than the Celtics can pay. And I wish they had locked him down last summer when his value was lower, because now he's a borderline all-star, right? And I can't think of one team in the league that wouldn't want Derek White as one of their starting guards. And so I hope that he sticks around. I think he's so important to what this team has been able to accomplish and what they'll be able to accomplish in the future. And I do think he loves it in Boston. But if it comes down to like another team can offer him $50 million more than Boston can, like, I don't know. He's never gotten a huge payday the way that like a Tatum or a Brown or a Holiday have. So he might have to take it. So I really hope he can stick around. But there's a possibility that they just aren't able to compete with another offer on the market. And this summer is going to be critical to extending him.
I hope so too, because I know that there are other teams in the league that's going to be willing to pay him more. Like, I think of the New York Knicks as a key example, as they just acquired Mikal Bridges from the Brooklyn Nets. being an example. But I think Derek White realizes the significance of the culture in Boston as pertains to, obviously, like, now you have a championship under your belt and what it takes to win, and being part of that locker room, in which that, I mean, it's so critical and so important. And you hit the nail on the head when you said that this is going to be the most critical and the most expensive six-man rotation in the league. There's no question about that. But I think because of that, this is now where other teams are going to be gunning for the Celtics' head, if you will, because I just mentioned the New York Knicks is just an example of saying, oh, this is what the Celtics are doing. Okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go out and get Mikal Bridges. I'm sorry, what? So now, like, I'm not saying I'm afraid of the Knicks. No, God, no. But it would be a mistake to underestimate the Knicks as being the best contender in the East for next season when you look at the Eastern Conference powerhouse between Boston, the Knicks, and as well as the Milwaukee Bucks. Even though I have my questions about the Milwaukee Bucks as to can Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard work out long term? Can that duo coexist? So Noah, what are your thoughts on like what we're talking about in terms of teams that could potentially be a challenge for the Celtics next season in the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of great points. I do think the Knicks are going to be a really good team next year. I thought they were a really good team this year, and had they been able to stay a little bit healthier, and not even a lot bit, but just a little bit healthier, I do think it would have been a conference finals between Boston and New York, which I think most basketball fans were excited about. And now you have, yeah, right.
Yep.
And now you have Mikal Bridges only enhancing that roster. I personally love the Knicks. I will say, I say it every time I'm on a Knicks related podcast or anything, that I think what they've done with the Villanova guys and just the energy around that team, so fun to watch. I love Jalen Brunson. I don't think Mikal Bridges is the lockdown defensive wing that's going to bother Jaylen and Jayson the way that maybe people are talking about him. I really like Mikal Bridges, but I just think historically he hasn't been that as much as like an OG Anunoby has, but they have both now, right? So they're deep. They have a lot of good players that I think are going to be bought into their role. They're probably the number one team that I would foresee being a threat to Boston. Miami, I spent all season saying Miami's the biggest threat in the playoffs, and that was just because I had the trauma of watching Miami these last few postseasons.
Yeah.
And so to me, I got to take Miami out now. I just don't think they have enough. And again, if the Jimmy Butler is still there next year and they kept him, and I don't know what the deal is. I know he's threatening that he's not going to extend. They are still going to be dangerous. And we didn't see the full Miami team this postseason, but they're probably not at the top of the list anymore for me, just because I don't think they've made the necessary upgrades that other teams have. And then Philadelphia, I don't know. I still think that I know Boston fans are super confident when it comes to Philadelphia, just because
I don't trust them.
Yeah, and I know that Philadelphia just hasn't been able to put together wins in the postseason, and Joel Embiid hasn't been able to stay healthy. But when Joel Embiid is healthy during the regular season, like, he was the best player in the league for a stretch there before he went down. And so if he's finally able to put together a healthy season and Tyrese Maxey continues to get better, and they're able to get maybe a third star, we'll see what happens in free agency. They're on my radar. Obviously, they didn't do anything this playoff run. They haven't really done anything with this entire generation of, this entire Embiid era. But I'm always like, I always think they're about to click, and then they never do. So maybe I'll continue to be proven, and I enjoy watching it, I will say. But I still think that there's a healthy level of respect that I have for the 76ers, just because they have a couple of guys that are formidable.
I don't dislike the Sixers, but I don't want to say have a disdain, because I don't think that's fair. But I do have like that eye of, okay, I'll see it. I'll believe it when I see it, because for the last 5 years, even going back to when Jimmy Butler was with the Sixers, I looked at that team and said, okay, maybe they can finally begin to get to the conference finals, but it just hasn't happened yet. Which is why, like, I still have mistrust as to, can the Sixers finally get over the hump and have playoffs, because they still haven't had it just yet. Even with all of the changes that they have experienced over the last 2-3 years on roster-wise, I just don't trust set on the Philadelphia 76ers at all. But as you were talking about like wingers that could maybe play against like Tatum and Brown and Mikal Bridges, like being one of those guys. I still look at Tatum and Brown as those guys as right now until I see a team be able to find defenders that can defend those two. I don't see a challenger right now that could pose a challenge for the Celtics next season. Because I mean, say what you will, and I've heard this on social media. This is not directed at you, but I've heard people say, "Well, the Knicks are coming. The Knicks are coming." Like, slow your roll. Because if Dante DiVincenzo isn't back, nah, it ain't happening. If if OG Anunoby can stay healthy, yeah. And also, I'm hoping that Jalen Brunson can stay healthy, because losing him and as well as losing Julius Randle, killers, absolute killers for the Knicks last postseason. But last postseason, and midst of all the fun basketball that we watched, there has never been more of a maddening time as a basketball fan, let alone as a Celtics fan, where I have seen more disrespect pointed towards both a team, obviously the Celtics, but especially Jayson Tatum. And Noah, you cover the team. You were there at home, on the road, and I just gotta ask: did you see that disrespect being used as fuel, most notably by Tatum, where people said we need Tatum to be more of a scorer, but in reality, he was more of a facilitator, and rightfully so, because it worked for the team in order for them to win a championship. Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I'll just say I have a very strong view on how Tatum should and can be used. And I think
Mm-hmm.
when Jayson Tatum is a facilitator on this roster, the Celtics are unstoppable. Like truly and I think they know that, and I think he knows that, and that's why they all leaned into it. But in games like I think it was game 1, he had 12 assists.
Yep,
Um,
game one.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
game 5, he might have had a lot of assists. I forget how much he landed with. The numbers are starting to fade for me, but when he's a facilitator and when he's a pass first player, and you have Drew Holiday and Derek White and Jaylen Brown as the people you're passing to, I don't think you can beat the Celtics. You just can't. And where they start to lose it is when he's taking tough shots and when he's taking the fadeaway or the pull up threes and he's not feeling it. Then you're bailing out the opposing team, because a fadeaway three with a hand in his face from Jayson Tatum is pretty much what you have to live with as the opposing team, right? He can still make them sometimes, right? He's not a terrible shooter, but this postseason he struggled, and in general, it's not a high percentage shot. And anything is better than Jaylen Brown in the dunker spot or Drew Holiday 2 feet from the basket or Derek White for an open three, right? Like those are the shots that you live for.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, I don't understand. And I always say this, like, as someone who talks about basketball,
Yeah.
like, and I played basketball my whole life, I have my own viewpoints. I also know that NBA coaches know a lot more than me, and I like to disclaim that. I don't understand why so many coaches double Tatum and allow him to become a facilitator, because I've never seen it work out for opposing teams. The only time that I've seen teams succeed against Boston was when they play Tatum straight up and they have a good defender that just makes his life miserable.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think he's a star that you can guard. There are certain scorers in this league that you just can't bother. And I do think he's someone that you can bother. Not a lot of people can do it, but there are some that can. And so to me, when Tatum is a facilitator, that is like peak 2024 Celtics basketball. And maybe 3 years ago that wasn't the case because you didn't have a team of all-stars around him, right? But you now have a roster assembled that if you play single coverage or Drew Holiday, they'll never double on Drew Holiday, right? He was an all-star last year. So if he has the weakest defender on the court on him, like he'll go for 28, and he showed us that. So
Yep.
I feel like they just keep the teams that evaluated, the analysts that evaluated Jayson Tatum's performance this postseason were viewing him in a vacuum, in a comparative lens with like Anthony Edwards, Jayson Tatum. Like, why is he not scoring as much as those guys? And not viewing the Celtics as a team and what his unique role was on that roster. And he's smart enough to know that what mattered was not how many points he scored in this playoff run. It would mattered if they won the championship. And I
Mm-hmm.
just hope that he's able to continue having that mentality moving forward, and that he doesn't feel now like, hey, I won the championship. Maybe next year I want to go for MVP, because this
Yeah.
team requires him to be a facilitator, I think, to be effective. And I still think he has another leap in him that he could become an even better facilitator, because he's shown us flashes of just brilliant court vision and passing. And that's the version of Celtics basketball that I enjoy watching the most. And I think that Missoula has really gotten him to buy in, and everybody's bought into that system.
And the system has worked out perfectly. I mean, I can't ask for anything more especially now that they're about to raise Banner 18 in October at TD Garden. And speaking of Joe Mazzulla, because I remember thinking to myself that this going back to moments in times before the championship glory of this season and so forth. A moment in time for me, I want to go back to game 4 of the Eastern Conference Finals last year against Miami. They're down 0-3 against the Heat. And my thought process was at that time, in complete full transparency, was if they get swept, I'm not sure that Joe Mazzulla comes back as head coach. Obviously, we know how things ended out, but going back to that moment in time where the Celtics they had just gotten their ass handed to them in Game 3 in embarrassing fashion, where Wick Grossbeck goes into the Celtics locker room in Miami and pretty much blasted the team, asking, "Where is the cojones?" Paraphrasing what he said, and obviously the Celtics losing in Game 7, and Brad Stevens remaining committed to staying with Joe Mazzulla and instilling the faith in him to be able to ultimately become the head coach that he has become. How important of a decision that was as it pertains to the direction of the franchise? Because we can sit here and talk about the roster and the changes that were made, but I think the single most important decision made was Brad Stevens staying and sticking with Joe Mazzulla after the Celtics lost Game 7 of the conference finals against Miami last year in 2023.
Yeah, I think you're right. First of all, I mean, had he been fired, it would have been 4 coaches in 4 years. Like
Yeah.
that's a losing recipe, right? You don't want that for your stars. You don't want that lack of continuity. And so to me, it was a blessing that I think he was able to turn that series around. And now you're 1 game from the finals, and now it's like, are you really going to fire the coach that brought you 1 game from the finals? And it's a different, and a sprained ankle away, like they've said a million times,
Yeah.
right? From being back in the finals and being the first team to complete that comeback. I think it showed a certain level of leadership, and it showed a lot of good things about this team that they were able to win 3 in a row, even though they lost that series. And right, so maybe if they get swept, maybe we lose Jaylen Brown. Like I don't know. I think a lot of things would have been different if they not strung together those wins, despite the fact that ultimately like that series had the same outcome, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think keeping Joe Mazzulla was one of the most important things that they could have done. He is a really good basketball coach. I think there's consensus around that now, and it's wild how quick narratives change. Because I felt like one of the turning points was when LeBron James said on his podcast that he's a genius, that Mazzulla is a genius, and I felt like after that you could see a visible difference in the way the national media discussed Joe. And it went from being that he's a liability and he's a weakness that they have to overcome to actually maybe there's something to this guy. And obviously there's something to this guy. There's a reason why he's the youngest coach since Bill Russell to lead a team to a championship. And there's a reason why Brad Stevens picked him and not anybody else on that bench to be the head coach, right? And so from being around him, I can just say I've learned a lot about basketball from him. I think he's been described as a basketball genius by Derek White. He's been Porzingis praises him every single time that he has the chance to. Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum have talked all year about how great this coaching staff has been. And so moving forward, I think it's one of the things that makes me the most optimistic about the Celtics team is the fact that they have Joe Mazzulla as a young coach who I don't think is going to leave for a very long time because he's a lifelong Celtics fan. He has roots in the community and roots in New England, and he loves it here. And I watched him at 4 in the morning after winning the championship, walking around TD Garden, and like he has this like religious connection with that building. It seems like, and so it's a great thing that they have him. And obviously, hindsight's 2020, but it's a great thing that he didn't get fired last season because now you're back to a position where you're starting from scratch. You don't have that buy-in. And he talked about it all year. The biggest change for him was just experience. It wasn't that he had got a great piece of advice from someone or, obviously he had his own coaching staff, but just having a year under his belt with that same core, now they're running it back and they've all been there together before. And next year will be the 3rd year, right? So it's like each year counts as like 10 years when you talk about experience, I think, when you're talking about an NBA playoff run. So it's just huge. Yeah, it's really funny to look at in hindsight how tenuous that position was and how now everybody's talking about him like other people are copying Mazzulla ball and he's a genius and he's using analytics and he's an innovator and all these things.
I mean, it's like he had the interim tag at the time to now being like the permanent head coach, quote unquote. And it's funny how like that moment in time like absolutely changed things in terms of ensuring that you have the continuity, especially for head coaching position in a league where it just seems that there's so much like change and so forth. And I want to touch on on the celebration of that night because you were there, seeing the clock take down even before they won the game. I gotta go back to one moment during that game where I just said to myself, "This is like divine intervention." And I'm talking about Peyton Pritchard
I
shooting
mean,
that shot from before the half court mark. I'm like, they're gonna win tonight. There is no way in hell when you have role players stepping up, and this was the second time they had done it too. He's stepping up before a half court. I'm just gonna throw it up in the air, and it goes in. Noah, when you saw that happen live, what was like your thoughts as you saw it happen, and as well as just over what were some of your thoughts going through your mind, especially during that moment, during halftime, and then for the remainder of that game?
yeah, I would say so. There were two moments during this playoff run that I felt like I was pretty confident that this team was going to get it done. Game three, when they came back in Indiana from being
Yeah.
down 18,
Mhm.
and now they're in complete control of the series, and they pulled out this clutch win that everybody said all year they couldn't do. I was like, this team was winning a championship, and I do these post game videos for CLNS, one of the companies that I work with, and I remember we titled it like the Celtics are winning the championship after that game. We just felt like this was it. This was the team. They had everything that you needed, and they obviously had the guts down the stretch as well. When Peyton Pritchard hit the shot, my thinking was they just won the championship. Like it was over. And obviously, 21-point lead. I think that's what it was going into the
Yeah.
half.
Mhm.
That's not, in NBA terms, 21-point leads can disappear like that. And we had just seen it happen in game three, right? Versus the Mavericks, where a 20-point lead turned into, I think, like four right
Yeah.
down the stretch.
Mhm.
But just every single and I always have my phone out, like filming the game from different vantage points. And
Yeah.
I went back and I watched like Jaylen Brown's reaction and Jayson Tatum's reaction and Luka's reaction and just like all the different reactions to it. And it was like, this game's over. Like it's insane. I mean, how many times can you do it? How many times? I mean, and then this was not just in the finals. I mean, Peyton Pritchard all season was hitting heaves to the point where I searched on my Twitter like Peyton Pritchard heaves, and we had asked him about it like 7 times throughout the season because he's done it so many times.
Yeah.
And so it was just, and then the fact that he just checked in for that was the craziest part of it all. Like 3 seconds to go, I was covering the game with a Mavericks reporter sitting near me as well. And I said, Peyton Pritchard's going to check in. And he was like, oh, it's weird because he didn't play this half. And I was like, no, but there's 3 seconds left. Like, this is what he's here for, right? And then he checks in, first time touching the ball the entire game, hits a three. It's just crazy. It's one of the most unfathomable things. And when you look at finals runs and you look at championship runs, like this
Yeah.
is what makes championship teams. This is what makes an NBA iconic. This is what makes basketball so great. It's like those moments, right? It's not just
Mhm.
Tatum was a good playmaker. It's like you have to have those championship moments. And Pritchard's shot is at the top of the list for me. And it's a legendary shot. He'll never be forgotten, regardless of what he does for the rest of his career. I think the two heaves in the NBA Finals are his only two made baskets in the wins, which is just
Yeah.
crazy to think about. It's pretty incredible.
It truly is. And I want to go back to Tatum and Brown because I would be remiss if I didn't spend at least some time like asking you about those two. Because obviously Tatum and Brown, best young duo in the league, but also the pillars of this Boston Celtics franchise. And I'm sure over the course of the next several weeks, months going into next season, us Celtics fans and people who cover the Celtics are going to talk about what this championship meant and still means to this duo. You were there watching the celebration unfold, and just I had the chance to watch Tatum on TV scream, "We did it," and seeing Jaylen Brown win Finals MVP from where they were. Both were drafted number 3 overall, 2016, 2017, respectively, to going through the disappointments and the heartbreaks in the playoffs and finally bringing home banner number 18. What was the sense that you got in terms of what this championship meant to finally be able to bring it back to Boston, and as well as to Tatum and Brown, who have had so much criticism, especially in the last 2-3 years, but to finally be able to get it done?
Yeah, I mean, I think it meant everything to them, and I think it was a weight off their shoulders too, like such a relief after all the criticism and the questions around them as a duo and the questions around whether they're winners. Like I think there was a sense of relief for Tatum on like a he won the championship and that's it, and like this big hurdle where for some reason there was all this pressure on him that he has to deliver a championship this year, even though he's still young. But everybody had him at the top of the list as like stars with the most pressure on them. And then for Jaylen, I think it was even more profound because the individual narrative around him was reversed. Like he went from being for he never should have been, but he was a little bit of a laughing stock of the league, like guy that has no left, that can't dribble, signed the richest contract in NBA history, to now he's the finals MVP. I mean, the best reward you can earn in basketball and
Yeah.
well deserved. And so I think they both had their own individual emotions of like this relief and this redemption. And then there was also the united one of we did this together. And I thought when Jaylen got awarded finals MVP, the first thing that he said was, I share this award with my partner in crime, Jayson Tatum.
Yeah.
That's not what he said when he won the Eastern Conference Finals MVP. I think he had thought about it and he really didn't feel like this was his award. It was their award. And it was a very profound moment, the way that he reacted to that. And then, we don't really get a lot of photos of them hugging and smiling. Every time there is one, everybody likes to plaster it. During the season, if you ask them about one or the other, they kept answers very generalized. I don't think they like to feed into giving us the quotes and the moments that we wanted. And I don't know what that was exactly, but I noticed that if you asked Jaylen about Jayson, he would just say, like, we're all great, or like he didn't like to give us those kind of sound bites. And after the finals, I felt like that act was just kind of dropped, and they were able to just talk freely and openly about how much they meant to each other. I feel like my whole Instagram feed is them posting photos of one another together,
Yeah.
So I feel like there's a sense of like there is no more questions around them. It's not about who's better, who's 1A or 1B. Like they're they're winners and they won a championship together ultimately.
The parade. I wish that I could have been among the 1.5 million people who were at the parade last Friday. And I mean, from all the content I saw, and including yours, and I was just like, yo, that looks incredible. Like just seeing so many notable moments and so forth. And as well as obviously the fans just reveling in banner number 18, finally being back in Boston. What are some of your memories and some of your like recollections of anything that may have stood out to you from the parade, the celebration, and everything that went on last Friday?
Yeah, I mean, I thought the parade was just joy. You just felt just complete,
Yeah.
unbridled joy, and it was the fans, it was the city, and then it was the players. Like watching, I've never seen Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum look so happy. Guys that don't always express their joy, don't always wear their heart on their sleeve. And so that was what stood out to me. I thought it was just really fun to be around.
Was it like as hot as many people thought it was going to be? Did the temperatures cool down? Because from what I heard, there was a massive heat wave last weekend in the Boston area. Like, did it at least be a bit more
Yeah,
comfortable?
it cooled down for Friday. I think that's part of why they delayed it. There was like a heat advisory warning, so I don't think they would have actually been able to do it Wednesday or Thursday. But Friday was a little bit better, and honestly, I didn't even notice the heat. Maybe if there was anything, it was like the heat of all the people that were crowded together.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was the perfect weather as far as like all the photos. Sunny, beautiful day. It wasn't rainy or anything like that. And in Boston, you never know. So it's always
Yeah. And there's always that unpredictability factor when it comes to the weather and whatnot. I mean, speaking of which, there was a tornado just yesterday, from what I was gathering from NBC 10 Boston. And last question before I let you go. So, Celtics banner 18, mission accomplished, and the NBA draft just came and went like it was just like a breeze. It was barely noticeable, but for those that were paying attention, I couldn't help but to think, man, the Celtics, they have the 30th overall pick, defending NBA champions, yet they went out and they got and they made a pick that I thought was really interesting, in which that they went out and they got Baylor Shireman out of Creighton. And this was someone who like shot over 40% from the 3-point line. And from what all I saw was that so many people that were just lauding this pick, saying like, man, that guy's going to be a baller in the league. Like, like he may not get a whole lot of playing minutes for this upcoming season, but this guy could potentially make an impact. What were your thoughts on the Celtics 30th overall pick in Baylor Shireman?
Yeah, I think he's a great fit, and I love that they picked someone a little bit older because he'll be ready to go off the bat. He's a well-rounded player, and he's not a long-term project. And I'm so sorry, I have to jump.
Yeah.
I was trying to message you, but I don't know if you saw it. If you don't mind just editing this part out.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't see it at all. Like,
No, all good. Thank you. So sorry.
No worries. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for hopping on the Hub of Champions, and as well as like taking the time as well. Where can people find your work in conclusion?
Twitter, Noa Dalzell NBA, best place to find me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Noah.
Thanks
Just stay logged in. Like turn off the camera so that your audio and video can load.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure.